it's just like hard. Like every day is heavy and I feel like I'm thinking about it all the time, but I don't have a choice but to keep going.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and welcome back to Making Space. Not just a podcast, but a place for honest, open conversations about where people have been and who they're becoming. In some ways, it may seem odd that my last episode on cultivating a joyful life is followed by a conversation about grief, but over these past few weeks, I've been reminded that in life, joy and sorrow coexist. Yes, at times, one emotion may be more prominent than the other, but if we're being honest, there are still roses blooming amidst the thorns in our lives. Our emotions don't exist in silos, and I honestly think that it's part of the human experience to grow to recognize this phenomenon. In today's episode, I had a special conversation with my dear friend Hannah. We met freshman year, shout out to our old small group leader Kristen, and led our own small group together for the following 2 years. We quickly became inseparable, and I was blessed to have such an amazing friend walk beside me through the joy and sorrow I experienced while in college. Over time, I learned how incredibly resilient Hannah was, despite all that life threw her way. So when she called me last August with the tragic news about her brother, I was devastated. I'll leave it at that because we cover this and more in the conversation, but this episode requires a quick content warning that we'll be discussing death and murder, so please keep that in mind as you decide to listen. With that, let's get into the conversation.
So, what is something that you've learned or that you are currently learning that you wish your younger self could know?
Well, something I didn't think I would need to learn so young, but am currently learning is kind of the process of grief and kind of how to navigate that with myself and my family. So,
Yeah. So do you want to talk about, how you got to this point?
sure, yeah. I lost my brother in August of 2022. He was killed in an unfortunate accident. It was with people his own age. They just were living a life they didn't understand or need to be living. It was really sudden. I had talked to him like 8 hours before it happened. So, yeah, it was a lot. But we're trying to see the best in the situation and, remember him and honor him where we can.
Yeah. I remember when you called me, and at that point, he was brain dead, or?
At the time I called you, he had been out of surgery and we didn't know if he was brain dead.
Okay.
But like now that we know more of the story, his spinal cord was severed like right away. And so
Wow.
when the ambulance got there, he didn't have a pulse or anything. And they revived him and then took him to surgery and put him on life support and all that. But it wasn't until later that night that they tested and he was brain dead. So he was gone that entire day, but we, didn't know that yet.
Yeah. And it was completely sudden, so unexpected because he was young. He was 18.
Yeah, he was 18. He was like, he would have turned 19 in like 26 days or something. But yes, it was very sudden.
Yeah. And I think even on top of that, like just navigating how he died, how was that process for you? Like, how would you describe dealing with sudden grief and then having to go through that with your family, like being a part of a criminal investigation?
Yeah, first and foremost, like the most important to my journey, I think, would be that I really don't have a lot of anger about it. And granted, it's only been 7 months. So, I mean, that could very well change. The process of grieving is so varied between every person and also even day to day for me.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's truly like a gift from God. And I'm so grateful that I don't have a lot of anger. And I truly feel like that's because I like put it all out there with him. Like I always told him how I felt. And even when he was doing things like this, like, not great choices, he knew how I felt about it. And, I just felt very confident that he knows how much I loved him. And he, we had good, honest conversations. So I didn't feel like I had any regrets necessarily with my relationship with him. So that is definitely the most important thing. And something I try to tell people too is like, I feel like that's the key to not having a lot of regret and anger is just like, don't
Mm,
hold anything back with the people that you love while they're here.
yeah.
But as far as the criminal trial goes, I mean, it was definitely a lot. It was new. I learned a lot of things that I didn't necessarily want to know about, different definitions of murder versus capital murder or things like that.
Mhm.
But they actually found out who did it pretty quickly, I would say. I was kind of
Yeah.
expecting it to take a long time. But I mean, they had suspects within a week or two and people arrested by the third or fourth week. Since then, there hasn't really been much on that front, but we should be getting to like time for a trial shortly. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like you also had a unique position during this because like you're an older sister, also a
mhm,
younger sister, but an older sister to Caleb, and then like kind of this peacemaker in your family.
mhm.
And so did that come along with a feeling of pressure to feel a certain way or to like how to show up around your parents who are also dealing with this grief? Because it affects every single family member.
Yeah. It's kind of, I would say yes and no. It's kind of a complicated answer because I think that my history of being the peacemaker of the family has kind of conditioned me in a way to not be as emotional, be more like take care of business or reliable or things like that. So I think I kind of was
Yeah.
already, destined to be that way with things because of being that person in my family. But I don't necessarily feel like during this situation I had a lot of pressure to be that way from my family.
Mm.
I mean, I was super close with him. I don't want to say that my family wasn't close with him, but I was like really close with him. And so I know that my family kind of handled me with kid gloves a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
just being nervous about me breaking down, which is valid. I also was concerned about that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of extra isolating, I feel like, to like not have honest conversations with my family about grief because they were worried about
Mm.
me like falling apart. But once they felt more comfortable talking about how they were feeling and just being honest about how much it sucks and how unfair it is and everything like that, it was easier to navigate with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like remembering now, you call me and tell me this horrible thing has happened, like the worst thing anyone could ever think of or like imagine. And I was just speechless. It's like, what like, what can you say? And at that time, we didn't know like what
Mhm.
the outcome was going to be, but we just knew that, yeah, he was in the hospital in a critical condition.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's definitely something I wanted to talk about is like what to say, what not to say, because that day, the next day, etc. Like I couldn't say, oh, it's going to be okay because I didn't know if it was going to
Right.
be okay. And
Mhm.
if he did end up dying, like I didn't know what to say after that. And I didn't want to like say any false hope just to make you feel better or like share something related to more of a toxic
Mhm.
positivity mindset. So I just remember we were just like sitting on the phone and not saying anything for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, this is not really an answer to your question, but I was like so grateful for that phone call because I was actually out of town. I was in Illinois,
Oh yeah.
visiting family at the time. And so I got the call and I wasn't alone when I got the call, but like my cousin had to go to work and
Mm,
everyone was working. And so I was just in this house that's not mine by myself.
yeah.
And, I had booked a new flight and I was trying to get down there, but this was like at 8 a.m. and my flight wasn't until 3, which then got postponed to 5 and then 6. And it
Oh my
was
gosh.
just a lot of like waiting around and hopeless feeling and not knowing
Yeah.
what's going to happen. So I'm very grateful for that call. And I think that was kind of, I talked about it with my family and people who were there when I first got the call, but that was the first time like telling someone else about it. So I think you handled the call perfectly. I know it's like, even since then, I've known and have seen how hard it is to navigate for other people, which I totally understand. Like, I wouldn't know what to say either necessarily.
Hmm.
I think it's probably a good rule of thumb to stay away from blind positivity just because I know that the person dealing with it is feeling pretty hopeless and it seems like the first instinct to like want to make them feel better about the situation.
Mm.
But I'm almost glad that nobody did do that to me, because I feel like it would have been even more painful when it didn't work
Yeah.
out. Of like, I've been telling myself for days that it would be fine and it wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of my opinion. I think in general, people dealing with grief, it's going to be so different person to person. So everything that I'm saying is my experience and my
Yeah.
opinion on it. But I think honestly, just like sitting in how sucky it is was the most comforting thing. Like, it was so hard because whenever I would tell people and they would say, I'm sorry. And then it kind of felt like the pressure was on me to
Mm.
not necessarily bring up the mood, but kind of respond to that when I already have enough pressure of everything else on top of me. So my go-to started becoming, I'd be like, oh, I tell them and they'd say, oh, I'm sorry. And I'd say, yeah, me too. Like, I am also sorry. It is not good.
Yeah.
So that kind of like helped the situation, because the fact of the matter is I'm never going to experience someone not being sorry. And so I kind of just had to get used to that, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think just being honest about it, like it sucks and it's not fair and
Yeah.
it shouldn't happen to anyone, never mind an 18-year-old kid. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think what you just said is even helpful, just knowing that, yeah, like staying honest in the sense that it doesn't invalidate how you're feeling, because in the moment you're also feeling horrible. And so me being like, oh, but XYZ, like to raise your spirits
yeah.
is not helpful.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of, it's funny looking back on it now, but it was actually a nightmare when it was happening. Was my first, that very first day after I had finally gotten on the plane, and I was like crying the whole way on the plane, and I
Yeah.
got to the airport, and my dad had his friends come pick me up from the airport, and these are friends he knows from the bar, so they're already kind of questionable, you know. So I get there and I call them, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm here, and I'm at this gate," and they come meet me on foot. I'm like, could you not drive up to the gate? Like, I'm kind of dealing with a lot right now. But I didn't say any of that. I was like, I had the first time I met these people, and I'm obviously going through stuff, right? So it is what it is. And so I was rolling my massive suitcase and have my backpack on my back down DFW airport, and it was a woman and her husband, and she put her
Mhm.
arm around me. So now I'm carrying her and my bag. At first it was nice. She was kind of saying like she also lost her brother in an unexpected, sudden kind of way. So she knows what I'm going through. And she was like, but we don't know what's going to happen. And at this point, we pretty much knew that he was
Mhm.
gone. And she
Yeah.
was like, oh, well, he might be okay. You never know what the night will bring, or like just things like that. And
Mhm.
I didn't have the heart to be like, he's dead. Like, it's not going to end up okay. So that was a very interesting, my first experience with like someone just instilling false positivity in me.
Mm. I think like you telling me the story, you arrive at the airport, this woman's speaking to you, she's leaning on you, et cetera, et cetera. It just reminded me of that idea of being the strong friend. And I feel like this is not the first time you've heard this. I feel like you get this a lot. Like, you're so strong, you're so strong. Because in reality, you have faced a lot of hard things in your life and you're still here. You're still in your right mind, which is honestly
A blessing.
a blessing, to say the least, a miracle. And you only decide that someone is strong when they face a lot of hardship that they shouldn't have had to face in the first place. And like, how do you respond to that now when, you're talking about the loss of your brother and like navigating things in your family?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you say to that?
I would say for a long time, I honestly took it as like a compliment of,
Yeah.
I know that a lot of stories I tell sometimes make people not super comfortable and just make them feel bad and like, oh, so surprised that I am the way that I am. And which I appreciate, because yeah, it sucked and like I worked really hard to get through it. But after I lost Caleb, it was almost like a slap in the face more than anything, because I felt like my whole life I had been getting that. Like, you're so strong, you're so strong. Like, how could you be this way after everything? And then it was like, I appreciated it and it kind of spoke to the work that I was putting in. But now it was a reminder of like how I just felt so, I don't know, just like it was unfair. And I
Yeah.
wasn't really mad at God at a lot of the whole journey. But one thing I was mad at is I was like, when is it enough? Like, I've tried so
Yeah.
hard to be strong and get through it and, be positive through everything. And
Mm.
like, it just kept coming. I felt like I haven't had a break for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And so that was like kind of a source of anger for me where I was like, I don't want to be strong anymore. Like, stop giving me things that I have to be strong for.
Yeah.
I've kind of come around to it since then because I still do feel like people saying I'm strong is a testament to the work that I've put in. And
Yeah.
I've kind of started feeling that more the more time that passes. But it was definitely like something that I struggled with at first, of this thing that people always said to me becoming something that like upset me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such a good way of putting it or describing it.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, I do still strive to do that. Like, I think even now I'm kind of at the grief process where it's just like hard. Like, every day is heavy and I feel like I'm thinking about it all the time, but I don't have a choice but to keep going, kind of
Mm.
thing. And I was actually talking to my new young adult pastor recently about this, and I
Hmm.
was like, well, I don't have another choice. And she was like, well, you do. Like, you could just like lay in bed all day. You
Yeah.
could just not do anything. And that's kind of where I'm grateful for going through all these things that made me stronger, quote unquote,
Hmm.
because I don't see that as an option. Like, I'm going to get through it like I get through everything else. And I think that's really helped me in the process too.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like, you don't have to show up every day and like keep working and like keep moving through the pain. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take breaks.
Hmm.
You know, if a day is really hard, that doesn't mean that you can't take the day off and just focus on like your mental health.
Yeah. And I definitely have days like that too. Don't get me wrong. But
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, what has it looked like for you to put the work in?
that is a good question. I've done a couple of different things. At my church, there was a grief share group, which is kind of just a
Yeah.
biblical look at grief and getting through it. But to be completely honest, I think I just went too soon. I
Mm.
was so scared of the falling apart that I was so sure I was going to do that I just was like trying to be proactive in every step. And so I did do
Yeah.
it. And I do want to go back again because I do think it was valuable information, but it was just a lot to do when it was like that raw.
Hmm.
But I did try it, and I will use that later in my grieving process too. But aside from that, I don't know. I almost just tell myself like I've never been one to like lay down and take my situation. And so it feels like dishonest to myself to do that now.
Mm.
And kind of along those lines too is my brother was very, for people who know me, I'm, a homebody and I don't like to do stuff very often. And um, just being home is my comfort. And so he was always very vocal about wanting me to get out and do stuff and meet people and things like that. So it's almost like that almost helps me too, thinking of what he would be telling me to do, which I know is not lay in my room isolating myself.
Yeah.
So that also helps. And just talking about him as much as I can. I really like, I would talk about him every day if I could find people who would, I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but I do talk about him every chance I get. So
Yeah. No, and I think I've heard this somewhere. When you lose someone, eventually you do just want to talk about them, but nobody wants to ask because they're like, "Oh, this may be
yeah.
touchy. Like, I don't want to like trigger something in you," and then you're upset.
Hmm.
But for you, it's not like
No. And I think I try to like be vocal about that so people know because I understand it's
that.
such a hard situation to navigate for, outside people not grieving. So I try to be vocal about wanting to talk about him, and I'll even say stuff like if something reminds me about him, I'm like, "Oh, my brother loved that," or "I used to do that with my brother," and just things like that. Where it's not even like people don't necessarily have to ask more questions, but just knowing that someone else
Yeah.
knows another piece of him makes me
Mm.
feel better.
Yeah, and keeping his memory alive through
Hmm.
just like sharing about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of started going into this about just how this loss impacted your relationship with God, and I
Hmm.
wanted to talk more about this because I think for me, as an outsider's perspective, someone who has never lost someone immediately close to me, but you being a close friend to me and like having known a lot of things about your brother, and yeah, just seeing his life. I also have a younger brother, so a lot of things I could relate with. And I think it was just so heartbreaking because of some things you were saying, like Hannah's already been through so much. Like, why did this have to happen to her? And it was so, yeah, it was so hard for me to wrap my head around like the idea of someone being here and then just being gone. And
Oh,
that's just
for sure. Yeah.
like loss is just so, it's just so unexplainable. And I think it is like probably one of the hardest things you can face,
Mm-hmm.
because as humans, like being confronted with our mortality, and, from a Christian perspective, you were never made to like die.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, that wasn't the design, that we wouldn't continue to live and like that we would have to face this like, incredible sorrow. So yeah, I think I just had a lot of questions for God, and I felt like I wasn't getting any answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It might not be super coherent, but this is definitely kind of just my thoughts as
Yeah.
I've gone through things. First and foremost, I was angry because specifically with Caleb, we've gone through a lot. Like a couple summers ago, we went through a whole process with legal trouble and him going to a mental hospital and rehab and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was really bad. Like up until now, that was probably the worst season of my life just because it was so stressful. And it was also during COVID. So there was all of that
Mm.
going on top of it. And I was just so angry because I was like, that was so awful. And it was 4 or 5 months of constant stress and anxiety. And, it was awful on my mental health, on my physical health. It was just not
Yeah.
good. And so I was just so angry. I was like, why did you put us through all of that just to lose him anyway?
Mm.
And I was really juggling with that for the first couple weeks. But then I kind of noticed how I didn't have regret. And my family very much so is kind of playing the what if game of what if we did this, maybe he wouldn't have died. Maybe if we did that, he wouldn't have died. And I didn't. And so I kind of started realizing that lack of regret I had was because I put everything on the table and told him everything when he was here.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that if we didn't go through that summer a couple years ago, that I wouldn't feel that way. Because maybe I would say, what if we put him in a mental hospital? What if we put him in rehab? And if
Yeah.
those things could have helped. Um, but we did, and it didn't. So that kind of
Yeah.
helps too with my overall experience with loss and just knowing that like it is not comfortable. It was not fun, but I do think that it was God instilling this sense of comfort in me at this time,
Mm.
which seems so crazy to think about because it was so hard, but I really do think that that was a huge gift in the whole situation.
Mm.
And even at that time, I feel like angry is maybe a strong word. It was more so just confused. You just have a lot of questions when things
Yeah.
like this happen. And that was for sure my biggest one of unnecessary trauma and pain and all of those
Yeah.
things that come up with it. But I would say my one true moment of anger, for real anger at God, was it was the first Sunday I'd gone to church after all of this, which
Oh
was
yeah.
maybe 3 weeks after it happened. I didn't wear any makeup because I knew I was gonna be bawling, and I wore like sweats, which I don't dress like super nice, but I dress better than that to church. And I was like, I just have to get there. And we got there. I got my little box of Kleenex from the back of the church because I knew I'd need it. And immediately they started singing a song about how good God is and how he provides for us. And I was like, not me. Like, look at where I am and everything I've been through that's led me here. And I feel miserable. And like, this is going to sound dramatic and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but like, what is there to live for if this person I love so much is gone
Mm.
and anything could be taken away from you in the blink of an eye? It was just like, I don't know, it just changes your mindset about everything.
Yeah.
And I was just so angry. I would say, honestly, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes. I was just so angry. But then it kind of switched to being angry at my brother. Because I was like, I've never been angry at God for everything I've gone through. I've been confused, maybe doubtful, sure, questioning, all of those things, but never angry at God. And then I was angry at Caleb for making me angry at God. And that was kind of where that ended for me. But I mean, that's definitely gotten better with time too. But it was an interesting hour of time where I was just like all over the place with my relationship with God. But I think as time has gone on, it's gotten better. I'm not really angry, and I just trust that everything happened the way it was supposed to. And another huge blessing that I try to hold on to also was organ donation. We got to donate
Yeah.
a lot of Caleb's organs, including his heart, which was like a big one. You know, the movies and the books that are always like you meet the person that got the heart of your loved one and you like hear it and it's the same heart and it's really cool. And I am excited that we got to do that. But
Yeah.
more than anything, it just feels good to have at least a little bit of a silver lining to hold on to of helping other people and even potentially helping the families of people who are sick not experiencing what we experienced of losing a family member, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that has also been a huge blessing that I'm so grateful to God for, and it really helps. It helps me on the hard days.
Yeah. Yeah. Knowing that even though he's not alive, he's helping so many other people have life.
Yes,
Like
for sure.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, just thank you for being honest about how you were feeling. I feel like a lot of times, especially with faith, it's like, oh, but you don't want to doubt. Oh, but you don't want to ask questions or you don't want to, like wag your finger at God and be like, why me? But the reality is that we are human and like we experience all the human emotions. And so there's no point like suppressing it and acting like you don't feel a certain way when you do. Because I think the best thing is that he welcomes our questions and like our anger. And although like, unfortunately, we aren't promised a smooth life, we are promised that he'll be with us through it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that helped me at least.
For sure. And I would say, like, I feel like any kind of wavering in faith, whether it's from grief or loss or financial hardships, sickness, anything like that, it's so isolating. And I truly feel like the best thing you can do is be vocal and honest about it, especially with people you trust. But honestly, like right when it first happened, I would be telling anything to anybody. Like, I don't even care if I'm close to you. I'll tell you exactly why I'm angry at God. But I really do think that if you're going through something that is making you question such like a fundamental part of your identity, it's best to talk about it. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah. So this is something that I wanted to ask you about looking back in hindsight, because since it's something I'd never navigated before, I wasn't sure like how much to bring to you in the vein of, okay, how to be there for your friend.
Give it all to me.
So I think I wanted to be there for you, right? And I never knew what to say, but I just wanted you to know that I was available and like I wanted to make sure I was checking in on you for you to have the opportunity to just tell me how you felt. But I felt like me saying how I felt was not going to be productive, because if anything, it wasn't positive. And, you know, going back to like, okay, I don't want to be toxically positive. If I don't have anything like remotely good to say, then like, I'm just not going to say anything.
Right.
Yeah. Like I said, I had just so many questions. Like I just didn't understand. And I know what helped me was knowing that, okay, but there are people that I could bring all those negative things to if it wasn't going to be you. I remember that the day you called me, I called my mom afterwards and I was just like crying on the phone. And I'm just grateful for her for just being there, because, you know, she's older and like she's experienced the loss of people close to her. But like, I think that's something that helped me is like, okay, I don't know how to bring this to you, but I can bring this to other people so that at least when I'm talking to you, I can be fully present and like fully listen to what you have to say. And like, yeah, it wasn't my direct loss. And so I felt like me complaining to you was not productive. And eventually I actually talked to one of my friends, Chinieri, about it. And she had a close friend who had lost her brother as well, unexpectedly. And I think that helped me a lot with just like my questions and my questions towards God as well, because she was like, for her, wanting to be there for her friend. And then one day somebody asked her, well, how are you doing? And she like broke down. She didn't realize that trying to be there was also taking a toll on her, because it is heavy. Like, it's something very heavy, and you don't want to take that to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just curious what you.
Yeah. I would say it might just be me. I don't want to say I'm a negative person, because I try to have positivity in terms of like expecting good things and hoping for good things.
Yeah.
But I would say I'm a little negative in humor or in how I talk sometimes. So it might just be that part of me, but like I think I would have been prepared for any questions or even negative thoughts or feelings or anything like that. I think even from the beginning, the main thing that I had in mind was like, this is awful. This is bad.
Yeah.
This sucks. And so I think any form of kind of agreeing with that wouldn't have been extra burden for me. Then again, it could very well be the exact opposite for another person who's grieving. But I would say for me, it was definitely like, I would talk about it with anyone, anyway. My family and I are very big jokers about like even dark stuff.
Yeah.
In moments like that, sometimes you need to laugh however it is.
Yeah.
But I would say one of the only kind of pieces of connection that were hard for me to accept were whenever people would be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you lost your brother. I lost my uncle's cousin last year," or something like that, where it was like almost comparing, like trying to have that relation of experience, but it not really being on the same level. Like that was kind of hard for me, because then I was thinking about like, oh, I wish I lost my uncle's cousin, or something like that, and it kind of just brought me down further when I thought about how close of a relationship I was truly losing. But in general, I mean, I totally get like not wanting to burden the person grieving, but it can also be so isolating. Like, even I have a sister, and she's my older sister, and she also lost a younger brother. And on paper, it sounds like we would have very similar experiences. But I even felt isolated from her because our experiences were so different.
Yeah.
I feel like whenever you're in that place of severe isolation, any taste of connection with somebody is so accepted and appreciated. You know, it just depends on the person and kind of where they're at. But I am glad that, you know, you're able to have conversations with people who have similar experiences and kind of get insight that way too. Especially that first week. Like, he was actually on life support for a couple of days while we did the paperwork and made sure that his body was strong enough for organ donation. And so that first week was, I feel like we were just running on fumes, but B, just running around with our heads cut off, doing all these errands that we
Yeah.
didn't want to be doing. So it was definitely a lot on my plate, time wise. But yeah, I would say anyone who's in a situation where they have a friend who lost someone, give them a little bit of time and kind of like you were saying, gauge how it seems like they're feeling whenever you ask them how they're doing. And if it seems like they're okay, I would honestly just ask them, or even say like, I'm having some feelings and I'd love to talk about it if you are feeling up to it, or you know, anything like that, where you kind of ask for permission to tell them how you're really feeling and any questions you have, but at least let them have the opportunity to have those conversations.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Like, asking for permission and giving them the opportunity, not just deciding for them. Like, oh, they won't like if I do this. Like, this won't go over well.
Yeah, and I could see how it could be a lot of pressure for someone, because you don't want them to say yes even if they're not feeling up to that. But in my experience, they won't. They'll be honest. They'll say, I don't really have the bandwidth for that at the moment, or can I call you next week, or something like that, if they're truly feeling like they can't talk about it at that time.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. And what you said about the conversations that don't go as well is when someone's like trying to have a point of relation to you in this, that it's not the same. And yeah, I feel like I've heard that as well. We feel like having a point of connection on like the experience level, like, oh, I've experienced something similar, will help them or be comforting in some way. But in reality, it may not be actually if it's not the same experience.
Yeah. And I would add that I think it depends on the closeness of the person. Like, if you had said something like that, I'm extremely close to you. So it wouldn't have felt that way because I already was close to you. But I think
Yeah.
it's more so like whenever it's someone who I maybe haven't talked to for a couple years or one of my parents' friends or something like that. And in those situations, if I'm not already feeling close to you and that's your attempt at getting closer with me,
Mhm.
then it's like it doesn't work out super well. But yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that's like the first instinct is to comfort them and make them feel like they're not alone. But I think there are better ways to do that than others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is what my friend Shannon shared with me. Based on her experience, she was like, it's important to still be there after the funeral. Because I think she was saying it's easy for a lot of people to be there like when it happens and then like up until the funeral. But then after that, everyone's like, okay, well, maybe unintentionally, most likely,
Mhm.
but they're just not as present anymore. But the family is still left with this huge loss and grief. Like it doesn't just go away after that.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say that's even like a more important time because we had a celebration of life and it was 3 or 4 weeks after he had passed.
Mm-hmm.
And up until that time, I did not a lot of grieving, to be honest. I was planning and looking for
Yeah.
venues and looking up food and different, like, there's just so many errands that you have to do when someone dies.
Yeah.
And after the funeral, I remember I was home and I was sitting watching some stupid Netflix movie on TV and I just like broke down, like
Mm.
sobbing, panic attack, because it was the first minute. It had been 5 weeks since he had passed, but it was the first minute that I didn't have anything else to do except be
Mm.
sad. And so I think that's a really valuable time to be there for someone, or at least like make sure that they know they're available if they want to talk about it. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I remember you talked to me about just like you kept yourself busy in one way or another,
Mhm.
or like you had people visiting you or people staying with you. You were worried about like when that ended, what were
Yeah.
things going to look like when you just had time to sit with your thoughts. That's so scary.
Yeah. Definitely the scariest time. Just like nothing else.
On that point, you enter like this new normal, and I think you've still like gone through transition since then because it's like, how did you deal with your job and like
Mhm.
friendships and other things?
Yeah. One thing I think that people don't talk about enough, I feel like I've heard the 7 stages of grief or whatever it is a million times. But you know
Mm-hmm.
what I don't hear anybody talk about is how physical grief is. Like, I get being exhausted and like not wanting to do stuff. That stuff makes sense. But like, I wasn't eating anything and that made me weaker, and lack of energy was also very prevalent. Lack of focus was like a huge one.
Mm.
I worked 100% remotely at the time and it was rough. Like, I don't know that I did anything for a couple weeks. And just like shortness of breath, that might be more anxiety related, but I had shortness of breath 100% of the time. And it was just like, it's very physical, which I wasn't expecting at all. I've read that you can have hair loss from it. It's crazy, like how physical it is, and nobody talks about that. So I think it's definitely something to, keep in mind and be prepared for if you're ever dealing with something like this. But aside from that, I kind of mentioned that job. After a couple weeks, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I It was so on my brain of like, life is obviously too short to be unnecessarily miserable in work. I can't be miserable while I'm working and while I'm not working. So I got to do something. And actually started applying for jobs and the interview process. And it was hard because I was just like so checked out, but I just knew I couldn't do this anymore. And in retrospect, I probably could have just, I was in a spot financially where I could have just taken a little bit of a break and figured out where I wanted to go from there. But luckily, I found like an amazing job and it's perfect for me and I love it so much. And it's hybrid. So I go in the office on days when I feel like I'm not going to have the motivation to do work, or if I just need to be around other people and not just
Mm.
at home with my dog. So it's been a really great situation. And
Yeah.
they'll tell you in grief programs to not make any big decisions while you're grieving. And that is crap. You should make any decision that makes you feel better as long as it's not harmful to you or others, just as an FYI. But yeah, as far as a new normal, I think it's hard, and I don't know that I've even found a normal. I think I kind of go through phases of having really good weeks where I'm cooking every night and cleaning and hanging out with people and doing everything that I think I should be doing on my checkbox of a healthy life. And some days I am not like that. And I think
Yeah.
that both are normal and okay to have.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And obviously, I'm very glad you left your old job.
Oh, yeah.
I remember you were like, I want to send my resignation now, but I have to wait. I have to look, and I want. And yeah, at that point, I wasn't in the mind space to think, oh, maybe you could just think about taking.
Yeah. I also was wanting to leave before this happened.
Yeah.
So I think that helps too. I didn't just like, I'm going to quit. Like, it also wasn't a healthy environment before I was grieving, and that just pushed it over the edge.
Yeah, it just compounded it. But then I think at the same time, you were like, but I don't want to be spending like all day doing nothing if I to give myself a break. Like, that could be worse.
For sure. For sure.
So thankfully, yeah, it all worked out that you found a great new job.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of started on this, but is there anything else that you didn't expect from this process?
I was really expecting holidays to be really hard. And I will say Thanksgiving, well, his birthday was in September and we celebrated that before I even came home from the funeral. So I think that kind of helped too, where I was still in like funeral mindset. I still had family around. So that wasn't as hard as I think it could have been. But Thanksgiving was like the first big holiday after that. And it was hard. And I didn't really want to do anything. I ended up going to my sort of brother-in-law's family's house, and it was good to be around other people. And my sister and I just cried together, and we didn't care that anyone was watching or hearing or anything like that. So it was honestly pretty therapeutic. But after that, holidays haven't been as challenging as I expected. It's like the mundane things that hit me the hardest. Like whenever there's a new trailer for a Marvel movie that he'll never see, and like that was a huge thing that we always talked about and bonded over. Or like we both really like different YouTubers and YouTube, and seeing something that he would have thought was so funny, or some big internet drama that we would have talked about for hours. Just things like that that hit you the hardest and way harder than holidays, which was surprising to me. Something else that was, I don't know if I would say it was surprising, but it was definitely like something in my experience that I wasn't expecting was every month. I didn't like have it on my calendar or anything, but I just kind of knew it was the last Monday of the month. So around that time, every month, I'd be like, oh, it's been 3 months. It's been 4 months. I wouldn't ruin my day necessarily, but it would just be heavy on me of like, oh, another month that he's been gone.
Yeah.
But the 6-month mark, I missed it. Like I didn't even think about it until a couple days after it had passed. And I felt like so guilty, which was surprising because I know logically that I shouldn't even be counting down anyway. Like that is probably not the healthiest way to go about it. But I just felt so guilty, like not remembering. And so that was like a little hard for me. But I came around eventually knowing that like this is good. It's better to not, linger in all the pain. And that's definitely what counting down the months was like.
Yeah.
Something else that was surprisingly hard was things that were new. So like the new year was really hard for me because 2023 was a year that Caleb didn't know and he didn't see. And those moments of missing things that I could have experienced with him were surprisingly hard. Because there's missing the person, there's missing our conversations and stories that we had and inside jokes that we had, but there's also mourning the experiences we didn't have. And so that was one of those things. And also, he died the day after my birthday, or technically he died like 8 minutes after my birthday was over. So I found that I've had a lot of anxiety about turning 24 in August because he's known me as 23. That's the last thing he knew me as for a couple of hours. I haven't had a full day as 23 with him. And so turning 24 is like a really scary thing for a lot of reasons, but especially just him not getting to see it.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely something that I'll kind of have to learn how to navigate the closer we get and how I want to spend that day and just kind of how I want to go about it in the future too.
Yeah. And I think originally when you had mentioned to me that you were just unsure about what you were going to do or if you were going to do anything for your birthday this year, at first I was like, oh, is it because the day that you died was so close to your birthday? But then it's like, even beyond that, it's just the fact that you're going to be a different age.
Yeah.
And like, he never knew you as that age.
Yes, for sure. And I will say my sister has been kind of talking to me about that and wanting to do something. And so we have decided that we will get a hotel room, get a bunch of snacks, and watch probably trashy reality TV because that's the best thing to watch when you're feeling bad because they make you feel so much better about your life choices. But I think it'll be good celebrating it with the person who most closely understands my experience.
Yeah.
Originally, I just wanted to be alone. Honestly, now, still, my instinct is to want to be alone, but I don't think in the long run that would be the best thing for me. So I think we have a plan as long as I can stick with it the closer we get. So,
Yeah. I like that plan if you decide to go with it. And I think even now, I remember when you were like, I think I'm going to move to Lubbock. I don't know why, but that seems like the best next thing to do. And then maybe I'll move again after that. It was just like, okay, I guess. But now I'm very glad that you are close to your sister.
Oh, 100%. Yes. And that's also, while we're talking about graces of God, my niece was born last June.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in Lubbock long term and long term, probably forever. Little perfect, adorable niece lives there. But I honestly, it feels kind of dark and scary when I think about where I would be if she weren't around while I was going through this. Because already grief and loss and death is so heavy. I don't know what I would have done without this beautiful, perfect example of life and vibrancy and birth. And just like seeing the promises that God makes that are good and honest and true in her have been like, fundamental in my whole experience. And I don't know where I'd be without her. So that's also something to put in the thank God I have it column going through this.
Yeah, little baby Sloan. And she is the most beautiful little girl ever. You can't see her, but just trust me. You could imagine like the most pretty little baby that is so cute that you just want to eat her up, but you can't because she's a child. That is her.
She is. I can confirm that with an unbiased opinion that she is the most perfect baby alive. So
completely unbiased.
Oh, for sure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I guess in addition to your needs, like what helps you now, like in the day to day?
I have like a little journal that I'll sometimes write to Caleb if I'm ever experiencing something or there's internet drama or whatever where I'm like wishing I could call him and tell him. I'll kind of write it down. I feel like that's a good release and that helps. Being with family, of course, is always helpful, especially since they stopped kind of being worried about me falling apart and we can have honest conversations about grief and having bad days. And sometimes I'll just call my dad crying and I'll be like, everything's okay, but like, I'm sad. And just knowing that is okay. You can just be sad.
Yeah.
Always in life, I try to think of the positive things and rely on that. And I think that's how I've gotten through a lot of things. But definitely in this experience, it's been a huge thing because, like I just keep saying, it's so unfair and awful. And there's very little good about it that I need to exist on those things or else I don't know what I would do. So definitely just like being positive and counting my blessings every day and just taking the good days in stride because you don't know how you'll feel tomorrow.
Yeah, it's even a miracle, like you were saying, how you don't really feel anger towards the people that
Mm-hmm.
killed him. There's going to be a trial, and like that will all happen in the coming months, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And like, we're hoping that justice will be served in the way that it should be.
for
But
sure. Yeah,
I can't imagine the extra weight and like, yeah, it's one thing to lose someone, but it's another thing to lose them at the hands of other
uh-huh.
people. And I can't imagine the extra weight you would be carrying if it was like just so much anger towards them, which is like totally natural and normal if that's what you feel, because
Sure. Yeah.
the horrible thing that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think kind of what gets me through that, or why I feel that way about the people who did this to him, is because one of them was 18 at the time and one of them was 17 at the time. And one of them was in high school and one of
Yeah.
them was working like Caleb was working. And there's just so many parallels between the experience of them and of Caleb that
Mm-hmm.
it's almost impossible for me to not imagine Caleb ending up on the other side of the gun, which could have happened. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's been in situations, or he claims to me that he had been in situations like this, that he could have been the one who did it. And if he had killed someone, I would want him to have punishment for that, but not
Yeah.
necessarily for the rest of his life. Like, they're just young, dumb kids who don't understand the consequences of the things that they're doing.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely trusting in the legal system, which is very scary to say, but in this instance,
Yeah.
I'm trusting that whatever is supposed to happen happens. And I mean, I wish them the best in everything, and I hope that they do have consequences and a punishment.
Yeah.
But I hope that they're able to come out of that stronger and happier, and live a fulfilling life after that. So that definitely is kind of my mindset when it comes to the trial and everything. We're just gonna let what happens happen. And I just don't find a lot of value in being angry, to be honest. Like, what is it gonna change except
Mm.
hurting me?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's definitely like a supernatural thing to extend mercy in this way towards another person,
Mm-hmm.
like forgiveness.
Definitely.
I'm really grateful that, yeah, you don't have to carry anger along with everything
Mm-hmm.
that's this.
Me too.
So, how do you want Caleb to be remembered? Like, you started talking about organ donation, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, how would you say you want to be remembered?
Yeah, I mean, the organization definitely helps. Like, having him be remembered as someone who was generous and kind, because he was.
Mm.
One thing I never want to do, and some members of my family tend to do this, where they kind of like paint him as an angel and
Mm.
in a lot more positive light than was maybe realistic. But to me, that's so disrespectful to his memory, because let me tell you something about Caleb, okay? He made bad choices, obviously. He was kind of a jerk. He was a little sleepy. He didn't really respect authority. But he was also so funny and kind, and he cared about how I was doing, and he wanted the best for me and for everybody that he was close to. And he was so smart. It was infuriating. Like, there are a lot of positive and negative things about any person. And so I
Yeah.
think for Caleb and anybody, I just hope that the people who know them the most paint an honest picture, because that's who they are. And preserving them as a person, I think, is the most important thing, as opposed to preserving this idea of them that you had or you want to
Mm.
perpetrate. But yeah, he was a good kid, and I watch a video of him laughing probably once a week at least, because he had the most amazing laugh. Even if he was laughing at me, I still liked it. Yeah, he was just an awesome person. And I think that if anything could come out of this, I just hope that people who hear our story or knew him don't take any time with your loved ones for granted.
Yeah.
You know, it's so easy to be angry and annoyed at your family members, but it's definitely worth it to at least attempt to, end every conversation positively and stay in touch as best as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, like, in the moment, but when you zoom out and you, like, look over the course of your life.
Yeah, and that's a lot of pressure. Not to put any pressure on anyone. I think it's very unlikely that the last time you talk to someone, or like every time you talk to someone is the last time.
Yeah.
Just because that happened. Just because it happened to me doesn't mean it's going to happen to anyone else. But all that to say, just be cognizant of, what could happen, and knowing time is valuable and life is valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I will definitely never forget about Caleb's tattoos because there are pictures, but
they're awful.
like, so many.
Ugly. He would win an award for ugliest tattoos, I think.
Like, is that a bird or is it a gun? We'll never know. But
yeah, they're rough.
That was always so funny. Is there anything else you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to?
Kind of along the lines of appreciating people while they're here is one of the only minuscule things that I have any semblance of regret over, and I wouldn't even necessarily call it that, but a little bit, is that the last time I talked to him, he called me on my birthday, and we were waiting to go inside Texas Roadhouse. It was busy. And so we were waiting, and, they texted us and said, oh, you can come inside and come to your table. And so I was talking to him, and I was like, oh, we're going to the restaurant now. I'll talk to you later. And I did that thing where you, like, go to hang up, and then they say something else, but you had already pressed the button, And he said, I love you. And I pressed the hang up button, and I didn't say it back. And I don't want to say I regret it because I know he knows that I loved him.
Yeah.
But I would just say, as a person who is not very touchy-feely a lot of the time, and I probably ended phone calls with I love you maybe a third of the time, like not very often. I do think that saying you love someone is very valuable. I think it means a lot, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated because I do wish I would have said it. And I think that would have been a big difference to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember this is something you had told me early on. And yeah, obviously he knows how much you love.
And I told my grandma about it because I remember I told you were the first person I called after all of this happened. And I told you, and I remember you saying something along those lines of like, he knows you loved him. And I knew that was true.
Yeah.
But it just like was weighing on me, and I didn't tell anyone else because I felt like this weird guilt about it. But I told my grandma like the day after that, and without skipping a beat, she was like, but what a great 3 last words to hear from him. And it like completely changed my outlook on the whole thing. And I was like, you're right. Like those were the last things he said to me. And honestly, it might have been the last thing he said to anyone in my family, is that he loved me. And like that was a complete game changer. It was a complete game changer in my mindset of the situation. But definitely just like tell your loved ones you love them. Like it costs nothing to you, and it could mean everything one day. So
Hannah!
I know I've been pretty good this whole time.
I was gonna say you have been pretty good. It got me crying out my podcast.
I get a little teary, but I'm really good at the tilt your head back and suck them back in.
That's why you keep telling me. I'm like, how is she not in shambles right now? No.
Oh yeah, I gotta back in maybe every day. I don't know. Maybe not that often, but I have a lot of practice in the
I was gonna say you have experience. No, that's so beautiful, and what your grandma says such a great.
I'm really glad it was that and not something mean.
That's what
talk to me.
No, literally, because it could have been anything. He could have just hung up, like.
Yeah, I think the last text he sent me before that was like asking my zip code because he needed to use my credit card to get gas. Like, so it definitely is better than something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I usually end with the question of how have things changed for you now that you've like had to process grief at such an early age.
Mhm.
But I feel like you kind of answered it if you have something else to share.
I mean, honestly, everything has
Yeah.
changed. I think I'm still really struggling with the idea of like identity because I have my identity as a woman of God and knowing that that is a strong part of me. But like, I'm no longer an older sister and I'm no longer a middle child. And I mean, it's always just been the three of my siblings and my parents. So like a small
Yeah.
family, but now it's even smaller. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of things about my identity that have shifted. And I think I'm just going to have to go with it day by day and know that everything that's changed is permanent. Like there's no going back, so there's no use in like trying to just embracing the new life that I'm living.
Yeah. And, you know, this is your present day, but that doesn't erase your past. Like, it doesn't mean you
Sure.
weren't an older sister, you weren't a middle child. Like, that is also still in the picture of how you can describe.
Definitely. Especially in childhood and how relevant those things are to kind of how you grow up and your personality. So
Yeah.
definitely holding on to those and also knowing that like it isn't going to necessarily be this way forever. The way that my life is completely different now, it's probably going to be completely different 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So just knowing that like everything has changed and it probably will continue to do so.
Yeah. And I like how you explained it as just like, it's a daily thing. You being 7 months out now, it's not like all this happened in an instant. It's been like a daily thing.
Yeah.
Being honest with yourself and like others around you every day, feeling your feelings every day, but then also like putting in the work every day.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm incredibly grateful that we got to share Caleb's story through this conversation, and to Hannah for her vulnerability and courage. I hope this meets you where you are, whether you've experienced a loss of your own, are supporting a grieving friend through loss, or just curious about how to navigate grief through the myriad of ways it enters our lives. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Let me know via Instagram at the Making Space Podcast, where you can also follow for more content. Please rate or review the podcast wherever you listen and share this with someone who would benefit from hearing our conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode of Making Space. Bye!